Hey y'all! Thought we'd pop in today to talk about how to build a functional crafting space in a small home. Because apparently our hobbies did not get the memo that some of us do not live in a 4,000 square foot house with an entire wing devoted to yarn. Fiber crafts are especially talented at expanding. You start with one cross stitch kit, or a couple of balls of yarn and a crochet hook, and 6 months later, you're moving furniture because the stash has developed territorial ambitions. The good news is that you absolutely do not need a dedicated craft room to have a really useful crafting space. You need to figure out what you actually do, what you actually use, and how to make the space you have work harder without requiring you to crawl over 3 baskets of yarn just to reach the couch. The first thing I would do is forget about creating the perfect craft room and think about creating the perfect space for your particular craft. Those are very different things. If you're primarily a knitter or a crocheter, you probably don't need a 6-foot cutting table dominating the room like an aircraft carrier. If you cross-stitch, you need good lighting, comfortable seating, somewhere to keep floss and supplies, and enough room to work comfortably. If you sew or quilt, suddenly surface area becomes much more important. Think through what you actually do from the moment you pull out a project until you put it away. Your space needs to support that process. Otherwise, you can create something absolutely gorgeous that photographs beautifully and is completely useless the second you try to make anything in it. This is also where we have to discuss the craft supply collection. And I know nobody wants to discuss the craft supply collection. We would all prefer to pretend that every single thing in there is absolutely essential. Unfortunately, small spaces are extremely good at exposing our lives. If you have 7 nearly identical pairs of scissors but consistently reach for the same 2, perhaps all 7 do not require prime real estate beside your chair. That doesn't mean you have to be a minimalist and reduce your entire yarn stash to 3 tasteful skeins of beige wool. That's horrifying. It simply means the supplies you use constantly should be easiest to reach, while occasional supplies can live further away, maybe in a closet. Prime crafting territory should be reserved for the things that are actively earning their keep. Furniture becomes incredibly important when space is limited, and this is where multi-purpose pieces really shine. A drop-leaf table can be tiny most of the time and then suddenly become a proper work surface when you need it. A wall-mounted desk can fold away. A dining table can become a cutting table temporarily. Even a sturdy little folding chair can give you extra workspace and then disappear behind a door afterward. The important thing is not necessarily buying special craft furniture, because putting the word craft in front of furniture seems to magically increase the price by 73%. Look at ordinary furniture and ask what else it could do. A small home needs furniture with multiple jobs. Frankly, everything in a small house should probably have a resume. And then we have rolling carts, which might be one of civilization's greatest achievements. Fire, the wheel, indoor plumbing, and the 3-tier rolling cart. You can load one with your current knitting supplies, embroidery supplies, cross-stitch materials, sewing notions, or whatever you're using regularly, and move the entire operation wherever you need it. This is particularly useful when you don't have a permanent crafting area. You can work beside the couch, move everything to the table, and then roll it somewhere unobtrusive when you're finished. More importantly, the cart gives your supplies a designated home. You're not spending 20 minutes searching the house for the scissors you were absolutely certain you left beside you. Although, to be fair, sometimes the scissors are directly underneath the project. That's not an organizational problem, that's just crafting. Once you've used the floor space efficiently, start looking upward. Vertical storage is incredibly valuable in a small home because walls are basically unused storage space waiting for us to become sufficiently desperate. Pegboards are wonderful for tools you reach for constantly. Hooks can hold scissors and embroidery hoops, while baskets can hold smaller supplies. Floating shelves can handle yarn, fabric, containers, and project baskets. Even the back of a door can become storage with a hanging organizer. The trick is to keep frequently used supplies accessible without covering every horizontal surface in the room, because horizontal surfaces have a natural tendency to attract craft supplies. You clear a table completely, turn around for 17 seconds, and somehow there are 4 skeins of yarn, 2 patterns, a mug, scissors, and a project you haven't touched since February sitting on it. Don't know how that happens. Containers can help enormously, but they need to solve an actual problem rather than becoming another thing you collect. Clear containers are especially useful because you can see what's inside without opening 17 boxes looking for one specific shade of embroidery floss. Drawer dividers are excellent for smaller tools and notions. Stackable bins can make use of closets, shelves, and awkward corners, and shallow containers can sometimes slide under beds or furniture. Labels are also genuinely useful, especially when you have several containers that look identical. But organize according to how your brain naturally searches for things. There's no universally correct system. If sorting yarn by fiber makes perfect sense to you, do that. If your brain says, I need the purple stuff, organize by color. Your system has to make sense to you, not to an organization influencer with 12 matching baskets. For people who craft in shared spaces, I really like the idea of creating a project station rather than trying to establish a permanent studio. Keep everything needed for the current project together. A knitter might have yarn, needles, patterns, stitch markers, scissors, and a measuring tape in one basket. A cross-stitcher can keep the project, floss, needles, scissors, and other supplies all together. Then when you have the time to work, you're not conducting an archaeological expedition through the whole house. You grab the project and you start. When you're finished, everything goes back in that same container. This also helps prevent what I call project migration, where the pattern is on the table, the floss is beside the couch, the scissors are in the bedroom, and apparently one needle has entered another dimension entirely. Lighting deserves more attention than it usually gets, because fiber crafts can involve some incredibly tiny details. Cross-stitching dark thread onto dark fabric in poor lighting is less of a relaxing hobby and more of an eyesight endurance competition. You don't necessarily need a giant floor lamp, though. Clip-on lamps and adjustable task lights can provide excellent focus lighting without taking up too much room. If you can work near a window during the day, natural light's wonderful as well. Think about where the light actually falls when you're sitting in your normal crafting position. A beautifully illuminated table is not terribly useful if your hands and project are sitting in your own shadow. Good lighting doesn't just make crafting easier. It can help you work more comfortably for longer without finishing the evening feeling like you've been squinting at microscopic legal documents. Comfort matters just as much as storage. It's very easy to become so focused on fitting everything into a tiny space that we accidentally create a crafting station requiring the posture of a disgruntled shrimp. Your chair should support you properly. Your work should be at a comfortable height, and the things you reach for constantly shouldn't require repeatedly twisting and stretching. If you knit or crochet on the couch, think about where your yarn sits and whether you're constantly bending down to retrieve it. If you stitch at a table, make sure the chair and table height work together. Small spaces require compromises, sure, but physical comfort shouldn't be the first sacrifice. A clever crafting setup isn't particularly clever if 20 minutes of using it makes your neck file an official complaint. And finally, leave yourself a little room for inspiration. Functional doesn't have to mean sterile. You might have a tiny corkboard with color combinations you love, a shelf displaying beautiful yarn, a small basket containing projects you're excited to start, or a phone or tablet stand for digital patterns. Just be careful that your inspiration area doesn't quietly become another stash location wearing a fancy hat. The goal is to create a space that makes you want to sit down and make something. It doesn't have to look like a professional studio, and it certainly doesn't have to look perfect. Some of the best crafting spaces are strange little corners that have evolved over years because their owners kept adjusting them every time they discovered something that worked better. Well, y'all, that's about it. I'd love to know where you do most of your crafting, especially if you've managed to carve out a surprisingly functional little setup in your small space. So leave a comment and tell me about your happy craft corner, your rolling cart, your couch-based yarn headquarters, or whatever wonderfully improvised arrangement you've come up with. And if your current system consists of keeping everything within arm's reach and hoping nobody asks why there are 12 skeins of yarn living beside the sofa, that's valid too. Small space crafting isn't really about squeezing an imaginary full-size studio into a tiny home. It's about figuring out what you actually need, keeping those things accessible, and building a system that makes it easier to sit down and create. Happy stitching!